on my phone into silent.
Okay. Good afternoon, and welcome to You and Your Business with me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM. Each week, I invite a guest from the world of business to share their knowledge, insights, and tips to help you with your business challenges. If there's a topic you would like covered, or if you feel that you can make a contribution, please email me at yourbusiness@dublincityfm.ie, and perhaps we'll be chatting here one day soon. My guest this morning is, by her own definition, an unlikely entrepreneur. Having trained in nursing at Beaumont Hospital, Dublin, she went on to set up the Health Force Group in 2004, which she sold in 2015, following a bid between an Irish provider and a US provider. AnneMarie now works and is also a published author, speaker, and business coach. I'm delighted to welcome AnneMarie Graham to the You and Your Business studio. Hi, AnneMarie.
Hi, Alec. Thanks for having me.
No, it's great. Unlikely entrepreneur. I love that. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But as I say with all of my guests, I like to drag you back to those 30 days of school. And were you that academic that the world was waiting for, or had you other plans?
No, I wouldn't say I was. I mean, I was a hard worker. I wasn't, the natural brain box of the class or anything like that.
Nice.
But I mean, I always wanted to go into nursing, and that was always my thing from I was a child, that I wanted to be a nurse when I grew up. So the business world never really was something that had come into, even though there's a strong history of business on my mum's side of the family, but it wasn't something really that had come on my radar or that I'd ever thought about. So that's why I say an unlikely entrepreneur. I mean, I took on business studies in fourth year, and I failed the Christmas and the summer exams.
Right.
And my teacher ended up saying, "AnneMarie, I don't think this is for you. Maybe you should do home economics." So, I mean, a very unlikely entrepreneur, really.
Right. So, okay, you left school, nursing being your first love. Did you take it on?
I did, yeah. I went to Beaumont in Dublin, had a great training there, really enjoyed it. Learned so much, that I now bring it, that I subsequently brought into my business as well, just the focus on the discipline that you need in terms of nursing. And from Dublin then I went on to the UK and I worked in London. And really one of my big reasons for moving to London were there were huge opportunities for education that we wouldn't have had when I qualified in 1994 in Ireland. I mean, if you didn't want to do midwifery and you didn't want to do pediatrics, I'm like, well, what are you going to do? So the UK had, and London in particular, had the large hospitals and the large universities. So there was a much broader array of things and directions I could have taken.
It's amazing because we always tend to pride ourselves on our healthcare training and that here, but you identified perhaps a gap that was there already.
Our training definitely, I would say, was much stronger, and Irish nurses are renowned all over the world. But our post-training education, so things like at that time getting into your diploma courses for clinical specialities or degrees or masters. I mean, at that time you could have been, I specialised in neurosurgery, and I got the course in the UK within 6 months of being qualified, and within 4 months of actually starting in that hospital. I could have been waiting in Beaumont a year and a half or 2 years for that same course. So there just wasn't the volume. There wasn't really the volume, so therefore there wasn't as many opportunities.
So, okay, you managed to broaden your horizons there in London. What was that to lead on to for you?
So I suppose what I realised was neurosurgery, as well as being a very hard area of nursing to be in, it was going to leave me very limited when I moved back to Ireland, which was always in my plan, because there were, so few hospitals that had that area of speciality. So what I decided to do, I got funding through the UK system to do a health studies degree. So I decided to do my degree in general health, and then that would lead me on then to where I ended up working, which was workplace health. And what I tended to find on that degree was that the modules that I loved and the areas that I loved studying all tended to be around preventative health, and the workplace was a huge platform for that. So I really got into occupational health by accident in one way, but it's where I ended up really wanting to stay.
So actually you managed to find a niche for yourself just through your experience in the UK.
Yeah, so at the time I was working for Bupa, so they had a nurse-led, they were an occupational health service provider. So for companies, large corporates that didn't want a nurse on site full time, and they would buy the service in from Bupa. So the nurses would go out and deliver the service on an ad hoc basis, or maybe 1 or 2 days a week or whatever. And that was a service that in Ireland, you were really only looking at the large corporates. Unfortunately, the health insurers have a huge dominance in our market. It was very doctor-led as well. So we were way, way behind. And I really realized that when I moved home, which was one of the things that led me to setting up on my own. I mean, I was working for one provider when I moved home, where there was an expectation that I would do the medicals and then I would hand them into the doctor to be signed off. And I just thought that was putting nurses back, no autonomy, was putting us back years. So I knew that wasn't going to be for me. And that was one of the big reasons that I decided to set up on my own. And I also saw a niche in the SME market. So the larger end of the SME market, the say 300 to 600 employees, where again, they may not have been able to afford the bigger fees of the large health insurance and medical providers, but they still were interested in the service, or there was aspects of the service that legally they needed to do. And that was really where I pitched the first 5 years of my business. It was really only from year 6 onwards that I started. My company had become much better known in the market, and I started having, the corporates approach me. That was just something that happened. But in the beginning, the SME market was really where I wanted to be and where I wanted to stay.
I'd just like to take you back to the beginning of that. So, okay, you brought back your knowledge from the UK. You now have to enter into a market that's already challenging. How did you set up that sort of business? How did you pitch that? I'm sure our listeners would be interested from their own business perspective.
Yeah, I mean, really and truly, Alec, it comes down to mindset. I mean, if I had a tenner for everyone who said to me, "AnneMarie, it's a lovely idea and it's a great idea in the UK, but that won't work in Ireland. It's too doctor-led, it's too this, it's too that." But I just, I knew I would do whatever it had to take to make it work. So I gained really valuable experience in the UK in terms of I had a very senior nurse's position with Bupa. So I gained experience on the business side as well as on the clinical side. And I thought I will keep at it until it works. And that is, that level of persistence. And that's something that I've always had in anything I've ever done. I will persist until it works. That's really one of the things I put it down to. And I suppose there was a huge education piece as well. Even when I was prospecting and when I was pitching to businesses, a huge education piece around why they might provide things like health screening services or the things that are nice to have, and not just only focus on, well, this is what you need to do by law. Because, in the years of the boom, I suppose attracting and retaining talent was a big thing. And if all else is equal and one company offers, a health check as part of their package, an annual health check, and the other company doesn't, you're probably going to go with the one that puts some sort of a focus on the benefit on health.
I mean, really what you brought back was a lot of skill and discipline around nursing. However, now entering, I beg your pardon?
Yeah, around nursing, yeah.
But now you're bringing back in, you have a new skill set to learn, which is about business and sales and marketing. And how do you set up all of that? And how did you go about that?
I mean, that in terms of the way I did it really was self-taught. I joined BNI, a business networking organization, which was fantastic. I built my business on it, and I was willing to learn from people who were in the room. So I was willing to learn from the business coach, and I was willing to learn from the accountant, and I was willing to learn from the solicitor. And I was willing to learn from people who had built businesses and they were at the level that I wanted to be. And then in terms of the coaching myself aspect, I mean, self-development has always been an area I'd be hugely interested in. So I started looking at coaching books, and I did a coaching qualification, and I really started coaching myself. And, the funny thing is, a lot of the principles that were drilled into me through my nurse training, right, and that are a requirement for nursing in terms of good communication, focus, discipline, taking action, they're all things that I was able to carry into the business world. So when I started out, I wouldn't have necessarily thought, that my nurse trainer would have contributed to me being a successful business owner, but it did.
Right. You also talked about taking advantage, or not advantage, so we would, let's rephrase that, enjoying the knowledge of those around you, which so many business owners fail to take.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny, it's something that I see now in business owners I coach, where they're afraid to ask for help, or they're afraid to, admit what they don't know, or they're afraid to even get to know what they don't know because it could be seen as vulnerability or it could be seen as incompetence. And it's really just again around, around the mindset. I mean, I remember having a conversation with a woman in one of the women's networks I was in, and she said, "Oh, but I mean, you're going into if that I was the only girl in BNI or the only woman in BNI in my
Right.
chapter at the time for about 3 or 4 years." Now there was a
Right.
huge advantage in that for me because I ended up getting so much more help, and the guys making sure, is there anything we could do? Are you okay? What type of referral? One-to-ones. I used that to my advantage. Yes, I could have put on a major feminist kind of an attitude on me and thought, I
Yeah.
don't want to be patronized. But I actually remember a woman saying that to me in one of the women's networks. Do you not feel it very patronizing? And I said, no, because I look at the people whose business, whether they're male or female, I look at the people whose businesses are where I'd like to mine to be. And I take advice from them and I watch the way they do things and I implement them.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and and if and if they just think because you're a woman you're a bit more vulnerable, more fool them. So,
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, you create your own brand, you create your own reputation. I mean, anyone who knows me and anyone who knows me through business or anything like that, it's there's nothing, there's no one that doesn't have a bit of vulnerability. But I'm very direct and I'm not afraid to ask for help. But I'm not afraid if somebody's overstepping the mark to say, hold on a second here, I'm fine.
yeah, no, that's grand. You mentioned brand there. How important was that, and how did you go about that? It's part of your business.
That was actually something that I got help from the marketing person in BNI at the time. So in terms of just looking at, because my brand essentially really was me. And as the
Right.
business grew, and particularly after I acquired Employee Health in 2012, they were a brand in themselves. AnneMarie Graham was a brand in herself, and then Health Force was the company, the name that I had set up. Health Force was the limited company name. So we rebranded everything into the Health Force Group, and I was quite strategic in terms of how I marketed the different aspects of the service. So the mandatory and the medical legal end was very much AnneMarie Graham. But things like the medical, the health surveillance, which is mandatory by law, that was what Health Force had become known for. The screening end of it was what Employee Health was known for. So we rebranded as a group, and I just sold it in sold the same package in a slightly different way, really.
So branding obviously is important. In terms of acquiring a business, there must be certain challenges around that, and not just around due diligence, but
Mhm.
how do you manage that?
Again, seek good help. I mean, my due diligence was done by a different accountant than my own accountant because he was actually involved in the employee health business at the time. He
Sure.
gave me some very, very good help, but at the end of the day, it wasn't independent. I used a business coach. I had used a business coach for a number of years before I acquired Employee Health. So again, I utilized him for his skills, and the due diligence was a huge part of it. But acquiring a business does have difficulties because you have to look at the culture of the business. I suppose one of the problems within that business for me was about 80% of their work was directly related to one client. It was a health insurance provider. So if that
Right.
was pulled, 80% of your business was gone overnight. Also, the health insurance providers, they tend provide providers that they outsource stuff to want to do it for nothing. They want everything yesterday, they want it under their brand. So I actually had to have a meeting with that provider to say, well, that's not how this is going to work. So I suppose that was a worry taking it on in terms of you're taking on staff as well, which is something I had mostly, contract staff as opposed to permanent staff before I acquired Employee Health. The brilliant thing, I mean, I always had the same contractors I used on the nursing side and on the safety side.
Sure.
But it means you're only paying them when they're working. When you take on staff, I mean, traditionally in health screening, we would have had very quiet December and January, very quiet June, July, August. But then you had months where you had more work that you were able to take in. So that was a big change. And even things like increasing the size of the premises because you had now 3 staff as well as yourself and your 1 or 2 contractors. So that can be a stress. And for me to say that never caused me any stress, I'd be lying. There was an element of stress in that.
Yeah, it's interesting that the way you move forward was using contract staff, which I'm not sure a lot of SMEs know very much about and how that works, but it seemed to be a successful way for you to move in terms of strategy.
Yeah, so I mean, the one thing with contract staff is you need to make sure you have good contractors, because when these people are going in representing you or your brand or your company, you need to be sure that they're going to do the job well. So I actually, again, got a lot of my contractors through referral or through the likes of the BNI. So I had 2 safety contractors that I used for the whole 12, 13 years I was in business, the same 2 people, they were brilliant. And I had a panel of nurses. So I had about 6 nurses on my agency panel. And again, I knew their standard. They were absolutely fantastic nurses. I got phenomenal feedback from any clients they ever went into. But I suppose it was a more financially viable model for me, particularly, I mean, 2012, we were still in the years of the recession.
Yes.
Companies were only starting to spend on stuff again around then. So financially, it makes more sense because, like I say, you're only paying people when you're working. You don't have to house a team of 10 people. You're going to require less premises for 10 than you would for 2 or 3. So it just cuts down on all those sort of overheads. It cuts down on your revenue overheads.
Right.
And it still means that you're fair. The contractor, okay, you pay them a higher rate than you would pay regular staff for that reason. But I find it was a model that worked much better for me financially.
Yeah, and I think a lot of business owners are sort of penny wise, pound foolish, that they don't see the bigger picture when it comes to maybe operating a business like that, for example.
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose you have to, the potential worry with operating it like that is if you don't pick the right contractors.
Yes.
Now, in all of my years in business, I only had 1 nurse that didn't work out.
Sure.
And actually, she was a nurse. I mean, she had every qualification coming off the end of her CV. She did an absolutely fabulous interview, Oscar performance interview. She just was really scatty clinically. And she was the only one in all of the years of any of the contractors I used that didn't work out. And I had to ring her and say, look, there's been a few things mentioned today and this isn't going to work.
Sure.
But so I was lucky, but it's about, and the other thing I think with contractors as well is it's about giving them a brief. So I suppose there are a lot of similarities to the franchise model where you're giving them something exactly the way you want it done in the format you want to present it. So it's really important that you're very clear with contractors as to what they're doing and how you want, without telling them how to do their job, but in terms of presenting the type of material.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that you mentioned that. So few business owners seem to write a brief either for jobs or for design or for anything.
Yeah.
They just don't understand the benefit of it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like you give somebody, a destination to go to and they don't know where they're going and you give them no map. The likelihood is they'll find it eventually with signposts and if they take a road here and a road there, but a brief really, it just cements what you want done in the way that you want it done. It's easier for the contractor because they know what the expectation is. It keeps communication open, it keeps the relationship, healthy, and that's how the business and that flourishes.
You managed to set up businesses during a recession, and so many others are probably struggling with that now, as they have done maybe back in 2008. What would be the key secrets you'd say of meeting challenges and also the advantages of getting yourself up and running during a recession?
Well, like I say, I had my best years of growth during the recession, but I really put that down to mindset. Bob Proctor, who's one of the people that I've done training under, Bob talks about it being 95% mindset and 5% strategy. Now, yes, you need a good strategy. You need a sales strategy. You need a financial strategy. You need to work on all those things. But it really is about mindset. And during the recession, I actually became more focused, incredibly focused, and incredibly disciplined, and just persisted until I got things to work. So that's what I would say is the most important um, factor for any business owner at the moment. And actually, it doesn't scare me. I mean, I ended up working for 4 years for the company that bought me over. Probably stayed 2 years longer than I should have, but I didn't leave that company until last June. So, I was leaving a fairly decent package to go out on my own and start a coaching business. And then 7 months later, and I was due to start a huge project with one of the food groups in April, and that was pulled. And it looks like it'll probably be pulled for the rest of this year.
Right.
But it actually, it doesn't faze me. The pandemic doesn't faze me because I think I've done it before. So it's just the level of focus, the level of discipline, and the mindset. It's really, really, really important to be in the right mindset.
When you talk about discipline, give me an idea of a day that you're involved in. Where do you put your priorities?
So the first thing I do every day is I set, and I encourage all my clients to use this model as well. So I set a top 5 things that I need to do every day. So what are the 5 most important things that I need to do today to move my business forward? And I work through that. I read through that in the morning. I prioritize which order they're going to be in, and I literally just get them done. So sales and prospecting is probably the bit that I would be less comfortable with than you say around the marketing and social media and interactions, one-to-one meetings with people in my networks and things like that. So I do that task first. And it's a really good book for any of your listeners, if people haven't read it, is Brian Tracy's Eat the Frog. And he talks about eating the frog first thing in the morning. So the frog is your ugliest task, or the task that you enjoy least, or the thing that you think, oh, geez, I have to get that out of the way. If you do that first and it's done for the day, the rest of your day can only get better. So that's how I prioritize. And then, I mean, one of the mistakes maybe I made in the beginning in my last business was I spent a lot of time not being strategic in the way I planned my meetings. Now, the fact we're doing everything virtually now actually is a huge time saver. So I plan meetings if I can for the morning. People are fresher in the morning, they're more awake, they're more alert, rather than planning them for the afternoon. And I have 3 mornings a week that I dedicate to meetings with prospects. And I keep the discipline of doing that.
Right. And tell me, in terms of, as you said, sales was not one of your key strengths. How have you managed to embrace the frog there?
Yeah, you see, I love actually getting in front of people, and I have a fairly high conversion rate when I get in front of people. But
Right.
One of the things that I had to break down was, okay, how many calls does it take to get speaking to somebody? How many people I speak to can I get in front of or get a proposal into? How many of them do I convert? So you have to know your numbers. And actually, when you know your numbers, it's a really good driver because it makes it much easier when you can see what that outcome is going to be on doing your sales calls and following up sales calls and emails and getting in touch with people that even on a not necessarily a cold calling basis, but when you can see where there's going to be benefit in the business and how that's going to translate into your bottom line, I definitely think it makes it easier to do. I mean, as a strategy, I've never done cold calling.
Right.
I've used my networks. I've used people I know. I mean, my dad is hugely involved in the GAA. So when I started out, I used an awful lot of his contacts through the GAA. And I looked at the fact that, every person, well, BNI estimates that every person knows probably 200 people.
Yes, of
So
course.
the chances of you getting in front of 1 or 2 of them, if you make any effort at all, is fairly high. So as a strategy, I've never done cold calling, but cold calling for me would be ringing you and saying such and such, give me your name and said you might be interested in having a chat. That's what I would call cold calling, but it's not, I suppose, totally cold in that there's some.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't drop into sales straight away either. It's more about building relationships, is it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and that's usually what I do. I say, such and such, give me your name. This is what I do. I'm just wondering, would you be interested in having a chat? Or they thought you might be interested in having a chat. And I suppose it's the brilliant thing about joining networks that are kind of referral based. I mean, networks are lovely. It's nice if you have a nice time and you have a bit of crack and you have a nice breakfast or lunch or whatever. But the bottom line is most of us don't join networking for new mates. We
Yeah.
join it for business. So I think where there's a focus on referral, that's really good, because it just means the leads that you're getting are probably that bit warmer.
Sure, and you can connect in with it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to take you back in a bit of a conversation. You were saying that initially when you moved from London across here, that the Irish health system was about 15 years behind in terms of occupational health for companies. How has that progressed?
We're still pretty much 10 or 15 years behind. I mean, no, I don't want to sound like I'm being derogatory towards the system here. I mean, the value of Irish nurse training was just phenomenal, even in terms of getting a job. I mean, when I went for the interview, the person who actually interviewed me later told me, well, it wasn't a case of if you got the job, it was going to be when you got the job. But in terms of occupational health, I mean, if you look even at the UK's Safety Act, it's 1974. Ours is 1989. There's your 15 years. And really and truly, all we did was we took their 74 Act and reworded it. But it certainly, it is improving in terms of that it's become more proactive. It's become a lot more nurse-led. So it has definitely improved on a practical level, but it is still behind, I would have to say.
Let's talk about the brave AnneMarie. So you have a safe job, and then suddenly, okay, it's time to move on. You've decided it's time to move on, so you pick a slight downturn while you're doing it. And how's that working out for you? Tell us what you're doing today.
So today I actually work as a business coach, and I work with predominantly business owners, but I also work with, in corporate organizations, I tend to work with senior leadership teams. So ideal clients for me are people who are already good or high performers and want to do better, or team leaders that want to improve team performance and team function. So yeah, it's been, as I say, I'm not phased because I grew my last business in the recession, and you know, the corporate world was lovely, but being an employee is not for me. Being controlled by somebody else, being controlled by an organization's crap, it just is not for me. So I actually love being self-employed again. And again, it's around mindset. It's around, you know, I sat down last June and I wrote out very specific goals. And I think it's the one mistake business owners make is they have a broad idea of a goal, or they have a kind of a goal, but they don't set, first of all, a big enough goal because the fear factor kicks in and their goal isn't written down. So I sat down and I wrote out what my goal would be and how the business would progress. And I mean, this month and last month, I've earned more money than I would have earned in 6 months in that previous corporate job. So there's been no month that I've earned less, and most months I've learned more with more freedom. In an organization which is me, so I value myself, and it just makes it so much easier. So, but it's about attitude. It's definitely an attitude for me. Really, is the way you think, the feelings you attach to those thoughts, and the way that you act based on them. So it's about taking consistent and persistent action and having the discipline to do that. And it's so important at the moment in the pandemic.
Yeah. And what do you think are the main reasons goal setting fails for a lot of business owners?
They don't set a goal. They don't set a specific enough goal. They don't say, I want to achieve this by this time in this way. Or they set a goal. You know, I usually say to people I coach, if you're setting a goal you know you can achieve, or you're fairly certain you can achieve, your goal's not big enough. When you set a goal, it should kind of make you have that, oh my God, you know, it should stretch you, it should take you out of your comfort zone. That's where the growth is. And it shouldn't be, a lot of people worry even then when they set the goal, is they worry about the how, you know, how am I going to, so I mean, say for example, my financially, my target is to take into the business €900,000 between the 5th of September this year and the 5th of September next year. Now, I don't know how that's going to happen, but I know it will happen because I've set that goal, I've put it out there, and I will do whatever it takes to make it happen. But I know what my goal is. So I know what the financial goal is, I know what I want to achieve and when I want to achieve it by. And that's a huge thing that I think, and it's a huge goal. Is it a goal that scares me? Absolutely. Is it a goal that stretches me? Absolutely. But they're the goals that are worthwhile. That's where you have your most growth. And that growth leads on to further growth. You know, the more you grow as a business owner, the more you grow as an entrepreneur, the more your business will grow. There's no doubt about it.
Well, I must say, to sort of finish the show, I think that's a great piece of advice. Just before we close off, can you just tell our listeners where they can contact you and find out more about you?
Yeah, so if you go to my website, there's a query form on the website. My website is AnneMarieGraham.com, Anne with an E, so ANNEMARIE, and Graham, GRAHAM.com. Or you can email me to info@AnneMarieGraham.com. One of the things that I offer in terms of to prospects is a 20-minute laser focused coaching session. And that really allows me to see if we would be the right fit for working for each other. So if people are, you know, looking at coaching, and I do think coaching is hugely valuable at the moment to keep business owners on track, but you can avail of that. It's a no fee, no obligation session, 20 minutes, and I guarantee you will get benefit from doing it. So if you want to email me to info@AnneMarieGraham.com, that would be great.
Listen, fantastic. A special thanks to our guest, AnneMarie Graham, for coming into the You and Your Business studio today. Thanks also to Sam on Sound. The podcast of today's show will be available on dublincityfm.ie from tomorrow. Thank you for your company. And please remember to join me, Alec Drew, again next week at the same time, 12:30, right here on 103.2 Dublin City FM, for another edition of You and Your Business. There we go. That's it.
Lovely, Alec. Thank you very much. So that was actually much easier than I thought, much more enjoyable than I thought.
Yeah, well, that's why when people come to